Thank you.
It should just be like.
Yeah.
Go ahead. The computer here for me, did they?
What?
IT for Pat's
Oh,
computer.
yes, I will tell them that you are here.
Okay.
Thanks for being here.
Morning.
I will say a chaperone is a step in the right direction.
I'm just watching.
Oh, that's good. I didn't look at the platter.
Yeah.
I think we're ready to begin. You began already, didn't you?
I started the.
Okay, thank you. This is the governance committee being called at 1:08 on November 17th. I'm Andy Holloman, the chair. We'll go around the room and make introductions.
Rob Holland, operations with the district.
Dora Wilson, school board member.
Pat Higgins and
Jim Anderson, CFO.
Okay.
Kelly Lesson,
Thank you.
unimpaired school board.
Jared Brand, superintendent.
Nathan Foster, I'm sorry, second assistant school board.
I did that.
No,
Or East teacher, president.
Into it, already like the secondary
director.
Melanie Sutton, Fountain Physical Education Coordinator.
You get to introduce yourself then.
Patty Higgins.
Thank you. Moving to the agenda. First item is, and I'm sorry, we do have President Bellamy and Member Donnelly online in attendance also. First item up for discussion is Pledge of Allegiance survey and changes to board policy 6115. Does anyone wish to? Well, that's mine, actually.
No, this
No.
one is.
Mr. Donnelly's, yes,
Member
thank you.
Donnelly's, yeah.
Yes, you don't need to hold on.
Member
Mr. Chair,
Donnelly,
First of all, thank you for having this on the agenda today. I have before the members a draft proposal. The first page, well, the first section is the existing BP 6115. The next section is the proposed revisions to it. And then on the following page is the existing AR 6115A. And then below that is the state statute relating to the Pledge of Allegiance. So those are the four sections of the document that are before the members. It would, so the changes actually are contained in the second section on the first page, the proposed policy section. It would simply specify that the Pledge of Allegiance would be said at the beginning of every school day over the school-wide speaker system if available. That is actually consistent with the existing AR, but it is not in our board policy. And then second is a proposal that has been previously considered by the board in a slightly different form, that once a month, schools would play the national anthem and the state flag song over their loudspeakers. And then something we haven't had before the board for any consideration is the final sentence that appears there, and that individual schools may petition the school board for any exceptions to this policy, because I have heard members mention there might be certain schools that either, well, they didn't have the announcement system. That's, they would obviously be exempted from it, and might have some reason for not having these ceremonies on a daily or a monthly basis. And they could simply write a letter to the school board, and the school board could exempt them if it was appropriate. Just a basic thing here. I drafted this in legislative bill format, in that anything that's being deleted is capitalized and included by brackets, Anything that's being added is underlined and in bold. And that's standard legislative bill writing process.
Also like to note that Member Jacobs is with us online, and Member Wilson has shifted from being in person to online as well. So, any discussion from anyone?
Thank you, Member Donnelly, for bringing this forward. I know at a previous board meeting, I shared that I would be supportive of something to come before the board with respect to this area of interest. I would suggest considering a couple of edits, really out of the understanding that I feel like we hear people say, we don't want to teach what to think as much as how to think. And I want this to support activities that instill pride, I'll just say this, the school board shall encourage, if the school board encourages activities the comments that I have written here, I have to translate. The school board encourages activities and access to resources that instill pride in our country and understanding of its complex histories. So I guess I have a few edits that I would propose, and I'm not quite sure what the best way to bring them forward would be.
Can we discuss before we start editing?
Sure.
So I think this is the first time in my experience on the board that we are adjusting our policy to fit an AR. It's usually the other way around. So I have an issue, that doesn't make sense to me. So if the AR needs to be adjusted to fit our policy, I support that. But to rewrite our policy in this manner, I think we're overreaching with this. We're really overreaching with these edits. And I don't know what member Lesson's amendments are, but yeah, I would find it very difficult to support. If we were adjusting our policy because it did not work, the policy works. What is not working is what some members, the way it's not working. If the ARs are spelling out how the policy is supposed to be carried out, and in this case, it is a little confusing, then just ask the administration to adjust the AR. I don't think our policy needs any adjusting.
Anyone else wish to speak? If not, I'll put myself in the speaking order. And originally I'd come prepared to think in terms of the pledge and whether or not we adjusted our policy on that. I am one of those people that spent a lot of years in the classroom waiting for the announcements to end so that we could begin what we had planned for the day. Before addressing some things like the national anthem and the flag song, really would like to hear from building principals. One, on what they're doing now. And I do think in most of our buildings, there's a concerted effort to use the anthem and color guards in ways that make it very meaningful to their student body. Other principals may not think about it as much. There's almost 100 of them and they vary a lot. But also just the impact of something like this on their day each month, and whether or not they see it as enhancing respect, or if there are possible conflicts. If you have an assembly that day, does it all get repeated? I really don't know what principals will say when we ask them, but before we make changes in the school day, I would really like to hear back from them in some fashion. And I'm not sure what the best way to poll them on it. Certainly talking to APA and making them aware, and perhaps they could develop feedback internally and funnel it to us, or contacting them directly. And part of this just goes to my feeling that the board needs to stay out of the school day as much as we can, in terms of mandating really specific things happen at specific times. So I do have a problem with that part of it. And I'll also say I do think the stipulations on the pledge ideally should stay in the administrative regulations. And I don't know if the administration has thoughts on changing those. But to some degree, I'd like to see them written so they are more workable and workable for everyone. And then we'd be in a position to decide if we wanted to make stronger policy than that for some reason.
And I can chime in. Really, the purpose of bringing this to governance was because, you know, it sounds like this conversation's been happening for a while, and I want to give the board an opportunity to share their perspective on what's working, what's not working, whether it's with the policy and or the regulation, so we can figure out the best path forward. But I definitely welcome individuals who've been in the district longer than I have to maybe share some of the reasons why it sounds like the regulation's not working. Because that's the perspective I've gathered from the limited interactions I've had with board members about this. But are there particular limitations to our regulation that have led us to this point? Marty, do you have a perspective?
And I can't speak for administrative experience K-12. I mean, in high schools, when I'm on campus regularly, first thing in the morning, it is routine practice for them to ask students to stand or stop in the halls for the Pledge of Allegiance. I think most schools, that is part of their daily practice. Some schools may just do that at the beginning of each week. I'd have to go clarify that piece. So I guess I'm a little unclear on what problem we're trying to solve, because I see often that is being done in practice as it's outlined in the administrative regulation. And then I think the experience of most of the folks on the administrative side here, when we're at assemblies, when we're at sporting events, they are starting with the national anthem. They are starting with the presentation of the colors. And so in practice, at least the high school where my experience is grounded, I see that our schools are largely following the administrative regulation.
We think there's some schools that don't. And I think it's probably a small number. But we do think there are schools that don't have it as a regular course of events. And the question would be, what are they doing?
And for that reason, I would welcome some sort of, I've made perhaps a survey where we poll principals on what is your approach to ensuring that we're adhering to policy. And for those that are not, or for those who we know are not adhering to the policy, what are the barriers, whether it's infrastructure or whether it's some other thing. Administration's willing to go that route. I hadn't realized the length of time that this has been discussed, but now that I know, I want to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Marty Lang. I think the vast majority of schools, you're going to find it happens a lot. I mean, I've been in other situations before I became an educator. I didn't have the national anthem or color guard presentation or the pledge very often, but if you work in a school, it's just part of the fabric. It's there a lot. It's there at assemblies. It's much more prevalent than it is in the normal public sphere by quite a bit. But the perception is there may be a handful of schools that aren't. And I'm not too concerned if they're doing something else that fits within the culture of their school, but we don't know for sure that they are. And so I think that's the concern, is what are they doing? So I would want a survey to not simply be multiple choice, but if a school's not doing these things on a regular basis, what are they doing and what would fit in to their culture and their particular circumstances?
Margot has something to say too.
President Bellamy?
Yes, I just want it. I support a survey. I mean, we got to do something. This keeps coming up year after year after year, and it's not an item that interests the entire board, but I would support a survey if it would help us gain more insight And if we accept the result of the survey, I would support a survey. But remember, our schools are configured in different ways. In my grandson's classroom, it's not said over the intercom every day, but it is said in the classroom. That's how he learned it. So, and it may be that some schools that have teams or smaller learning communities, it will look different in those schools. So, you know, I think, again, our policy is fine. If we need to look at the ARs, then have the administration look at the ARs. I just don't know. I mean, we're not, and I don't know. Anyway, enough. I see Carl has his hand up.
Okay. Mr. Ace has to speak, and then Member Jacobs.
I was just gonna share, building on what's already been said, there are some school cultures that are trying to limit the use of the intercom as a way of less distraction. And so if that's a barrier to doing kind of a school-wide pledge, I know that some of those schools have addressed that in other ways. So I think your survey is probably the right way to go and say, if you're not using the intercom, right, then how that's specific to your concern.
Member Jacobs.
Yeah, thank you. The last time, or maybe it was last year, we spoke about this, and I think what came up was that the AR that's in place now is potentially restrictive, and that it mentions morning announcements and kind of infers that there's a PA system involved. And what I recall hearing was that that schools were largely, if not unanimously, meeting the intent, and that the pledge was recited daily, but that not all schools utilize the PA system or utilize the traditional morning announcement system. I'll give an example. I know ANCCS has like a morning check-in where everyone gathers to the center of the building, and there's an in-person gathering. And so, you know, they wouldn't use the PA system for a variety of reasons. And so what I mentioned at the time, and which I think I still stand by, is as long as the intent of the board policy is met, I would encourage administration to review the AR and remove some of the restrictions. You want something that is meaningful when we're talking about celebrating what makes our country great. Placing restrictions on it and making it concrete in a manner which is different than how each campus may choose to integrate things of meaning each day, to me hurts and goes against the intent of the value of why we would want to have the pledge in our buildings and why it's so important. And so that was kind of my stance on it then, and I think it still is the case. I think a survey is fine, but I think what we found over and over again is that schools are following the policy, but maybe just not in the very prescriptive manner that is outlined in the AR. And so I think that flexibility is ultimately what we're going to find the schools need. Thank you. And I did have a question for Member Donnelly. In the additions, Dave, that you added, there's a current requirement that someone you stand respectfully in silence. And then I think you added additional language. Could you explain the thought process there and what underlying incidents made you realize this was a problem that had to be fixed?
I think, Member Jacobs, I think you're referring to the very bottom of page 1, the second line from the bottom where the language is added, and not disrupt the ceremony. Is that what you're referring to?
Correct. Yeah, but I guess to add some additional context, I think that's already inferred, but it makes me think by adding the additional language, it sounds as if you've been made aware of incidents where there are people disrupting the ceremony yet somehow remaining completely silent. I'm just curious for more info on that.
Well, it's been a few years since I've had any feedback on that, but it was when I first started working on this about 5 years ago that I did get feedback about that there was a movement by some people to disrupt the saying of the Pledge of Allegiance. I do think that, the intent in the existing policy, respectful silence, should cover that. But I do think that I was getting reports from some people that people were doing other things rather than just standing there. They were intentionally trying to disrupt the pledge.
Mr. Chair, could I follow up?
Yes,
Thank you. Dave, could you get into specifics for me? I guess I'm really struggling to imagine how someone can be both respectfully silent and also be disrupting something at the same time. And my teenagers are really creative, but maybe I should be asking them instead. So can you fill me in?
Yeah, I mean, I can envision lots of ways to do it. I mean, you could maintain a you could, I could envision many ways which an individual could disrupt such a ceremony while being silent. And I don't want to get into describing, all the possibilities, but I think there's a lot.
Okay, I'll just wrap up by saying, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, the word respectful silence is included in the current language. And so absent some pretty specific examples, I think that's a pretty clear example of adding language to fix a problem that we can't articulate. To me, silence and respectful silence are two different things. If it was just silence, I could see, maybe us going down a rabbit hole. But if nothing's been occurring recently, and if we can't generate even a hypothetical example of what it might look like, I'm all for the policies being, generally speaking, as short and concise and effective as possible. And that particular language, I think, is perfect as is, because it mandates that respectful silence, I think, speaks for itself. And so I'll leave it there. And I still stand by my other comments that I think that the problem lies in the AR, which doesn't give schools flexibility to embrace kind of, the pledge, the Alaska flag song, and other ways that we can celebrate, the great things about our country and the freedoms associated with it. Thank you.
as a former middle school teacher, I'll say that I've had the opportunity to explain respectful to students, and it's a teachable moment. So it works out both academically and in terms of patriotism as well. Anyone else have comments on this?
I'll just clarify that the administration commits to conducting a survey to understand the practices at our schools. And then it sounds like from there, a follow-up would be, do we need to amend the AR to accommodate what's happening, or do we need to accommodate what's happening to meet the current AR? And it sounds like some board members are open to the possibility of amending the AR to add flexibility, but I definitely welcome opinions if the intent of this conversation is to change what's happening to meet the AR, which direction is the will of the board.
I do think it's our intent that every school promote patriotism, at least to this degree, in some specific way that they can describe. And at that point, I think board members would want to look at what some of the more unusual schools may be doing to see that it meets our threshold of what we think is sufficient. Yeah, I do think there's a concern that some schools just aren't, and they may have an excuse, and they may not be able to meet the AR as written. And so we would want to see an AR that leaves a pathway for every school to do a certain amount. So given that, does anyone else? My conclusion is that the committee would not take action on this today. We'll wait for the administration to do what Dr. Bryant just outlined, and then revisit this when it comes back. Is everyone okay with that?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If the committee was to get around to considering exceptions to the existing policy, we would have to do so consistently with AS 1403-130, which states the governing body shall require the Pledge of Allegiance to be recited regularly. So we would have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I would expect that to be part of the AR. Yeah. And Dr. Bryant's nodding yes on that one. Anyone else? Hearing nothing, we'll move on to BP 5040.
Great.
Yeah, I stopped sharing.
Oh, okay, super. Welcome to the Alaska Reads Act of Wellness Policies. That was supposed to be a joke. It is a comprehensive policy, and I appreciate Margaret's laughing. I appreciate the opportunity to update the board on the work of the Wellness Advisory Committee over really a robust and protracted period of time. So I appreciate all of the staff time. We've had about, I think, 5 community members who have participated in this process, as well as AEA and representative from the state. Board members Wilson and Bellamy have participated, member Jacobs. It's been quite a journey. So let me share my screen. And I'm not, well, before you, and a printout and then posted online is the committee's draft rewrite of board policy 5040. What I'm going to share, however, are I don't think I've saved the document, is a comparison of current board policy with the prospective board policy, so that we can see the potential edits. Sorry, go ahead. Let's share my screen. Is it sharing? No. But that's one. Okay. Amanda, I don't see my screen getting shared.
Did you do this? Share
Screen
screen
share.
at the bottom?
I have a copy in front of me, so I'm okay here, so.
Great, thank you. I'm looking for. in
Did you
Word.
open it up on your desktop, Kel?
Yeah, it's on my desktop. There's.
Oh, okay. Is it open?
You're in Zoom when you're sharing.
No, I haven't updated my Zoom. That's the problem. Yeah,
Here one more time.
But you are in, yeah, you have to share it on Zoom,
this is just in the Chrome tab.
but she is. on there.
Okay, well then, guess what? I'm just going to share.
Or send it to Amanda.
Okay,
Send it to Amanda.
Well, I
she can share it.
okay, well, I'm gonna just put this up and I'll walk us through. So the charge of the committee, just with a quick recap, we envisioned working on a leaner board policy. And some of the initial steps we took involved reviewing work that the prior wellness ad hoc committee put together in 2019. We then reviewed that with the state of Alaska's school wellness policy annual report checklist. There are components of this which are federally required and other components which are required for other grants. So we wanted it to be as compliant as possible. So it turns out, for example, you have to have language that says that water will be available, even though that seems silly and superfluous, you needed to have that language. Once we worked with our community members through the different sections, there's purpose, planning and periodic review, nutrition, physical education, physical activity, communication with families, and monitoring compliance and evaluation. We cross-referenced all of our changes with a tool that's been developed to help districts nationally called a WellSat 3.0 assessment tool. And we scored ourselves on the different components. And in the end, we ended up with a policy that is more robust and comprehensive than the state of Alaska's gold standard wellness policy. So I think that that speaks really well. And I think, you know, it was an interesting process because in the end, I think we really tried to reflect Anchorage values. When we scored ourselves, for example, on marketing, we gave ourselves a bunch of zeros because we understood that our school business partnerships are really quite important. And maybe maintaining those partnerships mattered more in the end for ASD than banning Tasty Freeze from helping out Hate Elementary School every so often. So key components of our, let me see. Actually, I'm going to go to the wellness survey really quickly. I have to reshare, hold on. New share. If we go to the Google Forms survey, so we ran this through our tool, we got our information, we pushed this out to the community, we got 3,200 responses, which I think is pretty impressive. And let me share this survey. So this is just the raw Google form. We had about 74% of our responses were parents and guardians. People could say I'm both a parent and, for example, staff. So percentages add up to more than 100%. Elementary staff gave us a number of our respondents. Students responded. Secondary, we had principals who responded as well, elementary and secondary. And then people liked to define themselves as fellow human beings, so on and so forth. We introduced in our survey each change. So I'm actually going to go to the question because it details the suggested change. The first change in the initial section was that we added language encouraging the district to provide opportunities in support of employee wellness and encourages staff to model healthy eating and physical activity behaviors. It turns out we got a bunch of pushback on the second component of this, so we deleted the second half of that. So we used our feedback to modify the document that you see before you. The second question that people were asked was with respect to establishing an ongoing wellness advisory group. And I think this is one of those components that people don't really like extra paperwork, but it's part of the requirement. And actually, I'm looking at the responses. I had this all tallied up in a different document, but we looked at, this was the purpose. We looked at, the planning. We looked at people's responses for each of these questions. So where we saw this pushback here, we edited the document that's before you. Maybe I'll just get right to the chase. Major changes in the proposed document. Let me reshare this. Major changes in the proposed document do entail, with the nutrition section, we made a distinction between foods that are sold in the district and foods that are made available, because those are two very different bodies of how food shows up in ASD. And we asked, there's something called smart snacks in school, which is a federal thing. And we asked the administration to prepare a number of ARs. And maybe at this point, is there one of the ARs that deals with nutrition, or is that the fundraising AR?
It's just the fundraising one.
Okay.
Specifically.
Okay, so for example, so in this section within the nutrition section, in addition to foods sold on campus, to the extent practicable, foods and beverages made available to students during the school day will be offered with consideration for promoting student health. ARs will be developed and maintained that includes suggestions for non-food rewards. I'm looking for fundraising. I'll have to find that.
In the draft AR folder.
In the draft AR, okay. Another major change would be to inscribe into policy that elementary schools shall provide a minimum, thank you, of 20 minutes of eating time after being served for lunch, 10 minutes for breakfast. Currently, we have an AR that brings lunch and recess together into a 45-minute block. This moves that into policy instead. We added language about secondary schools providing no less than 30 minutes total for lunch and unstructured physical activity. There's that water. So basically everything that's here is a reflection of either necessary components or really a product of robust committee discussion and our best understanding of our community's values. We added language about in this section about really supporting our students who are eligible for federal meal programs. That we would offer students a reimbursable meal regardless of whether the student has money to pay or owes money. I think that was additional language. The physical education section has a number of new components that were not a part of ASD's current policy, which was brought to the board by the Alaska Association of School Boards. And I think that the AASB had created a policy that would be usable in very different districts. And so we inserted some things that would be specific to ASD to respect best or better practices with physical education. Maybe I should let Melanie want to speak to anything. Okay. I mean, there's so much within this document. Physical activity reflects a change. We have state statute that requires ASD in all districts to provide 90% of the CDC's time physical activity during the school day. Previous language in the policy said 54 minutes, which is 90%, but we changed it back to 90% to really reflect the language. If the CDC changes the amount of time it recommends for physical activity each day, then we can change with it. So it's a little bit more nimble than the fixed 54 minutes. We changed a section here from a minimum of 20 minutes a day of recess to 30 minutes a day of recess. And there's that reference to state statute. I think that there are some ARs with respect to, there's an inclement weather recess AR now. Communication with families. We changed from communication with parents to families to be more inclusive. And there's those references to the smart snacks again. And really, and with the monitoring, compliance, and evaluation section, the federal government requires ASD to submit a triennial review of our practices. This document reflects that, and it also reflects the creation of kind of an ongoing feedback loop within ASD. And so the idea is, let's make sure that the district is complying with the intent of this policy, but also let's check in on an annual basis on what does that look like? And so this annual checkup would probably require a couple of would require an ongoing committee comprised of different stakeholders and survey of our stakeholders, the principals, but also other people in our school buildings. And then that would generate ideally a report for the board and for this, whatever this ongoing wellness committee might be, to really understand, refine our practices, understand what supports we need to improve our student wellness and learning as we move forward. And I think one of the other additions we made right at the end of our meeting was that this is the why. We added a section here that the board recognizes that physical and mental wellness contributes to students' readiness to learn, improve behavioral outcomes, increased attendance, and overall academic success. And that's the why. That's why this matters. So we have healthy students who are ready to learn. So I was going to let you speak, Marty, about some of the ARs, but I just kept on. Take it away.
Sure.
Maybe update us on the status of the other ARs.
Yeah.
And I couldn't share them in the chat because it's disabled, but I did quick add them to the agenda. So if you want me to share my screen and pull them up, I can.
Or yeah, at least so that we could get them to Member Donnelly.
Okay, they are attached to the meeting agenda, so they can access those by board docs now.
If they're
Okay.
interested in sort of following along as we
Okay.
talk through the piece, I just want to make sure they had access since they weren't.
Yeah, they're on there now.
Paper copies to everybody else. Yeah, I would echo what Member Lesson said. It was a good process. I think we spent 20+ hours probably in committee with a lot of different representative opinions. And we did start out with the intent to sort of pare this down to a less obese policy and then realized that the federal guidance really compels us to have all.
Which I called it the Alaska Greens Act because.
Yeah. So to add on to what you're saying there, it was really kind of funny because we had to change course about halfway through, but we did pull some things out that are, or expand on some things through ARs. There are 3 ARs that we have noted that we have not yet started. So let me start there. We have a general one that just notes a number of little pieces that we pulled out of the policy that we still wanted to acknowledge. And Melanie Sutton has started the draft of that one. We have one that speaks to kind of the flow and management best practices of a cafeteria, especially I think for our elementary schools, which vary largely in size. And so we'll work on that one. Forgot what the third one was on my list. An AR that really gives, especially our classroom practitioners, suggestions around how to do non-food rewards rather than providing sugary snacks as incentives for kids. So we'll get some specific language captured for that. But in terms of the 3 that we do have, at least in draft form, the first one is specific to fundraising. This really is targeted more at our secondary schools where a lot of fundraising activities happen through booster clubs for sports and activities for, all manner of things. And so this really captures what is required under federal law. So it defines what the school day is under federal law, what can and can't be sold during the school day, where it can and can't be sold. There's language in here specific to vending machines and how they can be used, to concession stands for after school activities. And then it also notes here something that we haven't previously highlighted with our schools, and that is that the state has a waiver process. So when they allow up to 25 days per year for high school and 10 for middle and elementary, for schools basically to set aside these rules and do more traditional fundraising activities that might include things like your traditional Thanksgiving meal in the ROTC room where they have marshmallows on top of the yams and things like that. So we're basically going to, now that we've got this drafted, if when this policy is approved, we will roll this out to principals and make sure that they understand. These really has been the law of the land for some time, but we haven't done a concerted effort to educate our principals on that. So this AAR would be kind of the first step in helping them see what is it that we need to do for federal compliance. The second AR is just acknowledging that especially our secondary students spend a lot of time in sports and activities outside the school day. So they get a lot of their physical activity through ASD sports, your participation in community programs. And so we have traditionally provided a number of opportunities for them to acknowledge that activity as a waiver of the PE requirement for graduation. And so this really just captures what has been historically in practice and acknowledges it in an AR. And then the third AR is directly out of the elementary administrative manual, and it just captures the language and guidance that we have been living under in terms of inclement weather and recess, when we would cancel recess at what temperature and at what conditions.
Right, and principals would cancel recess for wild animals on playgrounds or ice.
Yep.
Or other bizarre Alaska factors.
Yep. More than once I use my car first thing in the morning to try to steer a moose away from the entrance to the school as a principal. So are those circumstances. So any questions about those as they currently exist?
No,
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
Member Donlin?
Yeah. First of all, on page 2, the second to the bottom paragraph, where it refers to no less than 30 minutes total for lunch and unstructured physical activity. Is that to be read that it's 30 minutes for lunch and 30 minutes for unstructured physical activity, or that the combination of the two should be no less than 30 minutes?
Each or one?
This page 2 probably looks different than.
Yeah, mine reads secondary schools shall provide no less than 30 minutes total for lunch and unstructured physical activity.
Yeah, the version I'm looking at on page 2 of the second to the bottom paragraph, I took it off the agenda. And it says no less than 30 minutes total for lunch and unstructured physical activity. And I don't, there's two ways to read that grammatically, if it's 30 minutes for lunch, 30 minutes for unstructured, or whether the two are combined in 30 minutes.
It's an board policy, so that's specific to secondary school.
I think that,
It
yeah,
follows the direction for elementary, and that would be a combined 30 minutes for lunch and unstructured time. Not
Okay.
30 minutes for each. That was the instance. So we can certainly take that language up. That's helpful.
One more reason the Oxford comma should be law, but that's just me.
And then I had a question about the smart snacks in school waiver policy. Does that only apply during the school day? That they would require a waiver for the fundraising exemption?
yeah. And the school day, remember Donley, is defined by,
There's a federal definition of that, and it's essentially from midnight until a half hour after student release time.
Right,
And
so
that's
if
the definition
there,
of school day.
so if there's some fundraising event by the PTA at that school that evening, they don't have to get a waiver to sell cupcakes.
Do not, no.
And not at a sporting event either.
Okay,
it basically would prevent, candy bars being sold at lunchtime. Right?
Or even cotton candy being handed to the students on their way out the door.
Right.
You have to honor that half hour after student release. Any afternoon, evening activities where you have concession stands open, or you're bringing people in for a potluck, or you're providing, cookies at an academic awards, all of that is allowable under federal law. And we tried never to be more restrictive than is already required under federal law.
Yeah, I mean, this could have been much more of a cupcake police policy, but it's not.
okay.
Any other questions? Given that this is a draft, what were you hoping for an outcome today?
Well, it's a pretty final draft. I mean, we've put in
I'm sorry,
20 something hours of a lot of,
Mhm.
we're multiply the number of people in the room, we're talking hundreds of
Sure.
people hours involved in this process.
Okay.
So, if there is a point of clarification, secondary school shall provide no less than 30 minutes. 30 minutes, comma, total. Or, remember, Donley, would you like to suggest alternative language to clarify that?
What's the goal? What were they trying to say there? Is it just the combination of those two things would be 30 minutes?
Yeah, that students shall have basically an adequate amount of time to eat and do whatever they need to do. I think that's a reflection of current practice more than anything else.
You can put the word combined after the word activity.
Or total, yeah.
30 minutes for lunch and unstructured physical activity combined,
A total of 30, or a total of 30 minutes for, yeah,
no less than, shall provide no less than a total of
yeah.
30 minutes.
So,
The intent of member lessons was the sentence above was specific to lunch at elementary. Later in the physical activity, they addressed 30 minutes of recess unstructured.
Ah.
And therefore, to clarify that secondary would be the
Mhm.
total of lunch and recess
Mhm.
at 30 minutes versus elementary in the nutrition section, lunch, and then physical activity recess.
Mhm.
Therefore, like at elementary, that could look like a 20-minute seated time, and then the 5-minute passing, and then the 30-minute recess for a total of 55 minutes, where we were noting that secondary would not have that
Right.
requirement.
I mean, and when it came in the physical activity section, I think it would be, this policy would allow a school to decide, well, I'd like to split, I'd like a 10-minute recess here and a 20-minute recess here, or maybe just one 30-minute recess, whatever worked best for that.
And noting also that the secondary high school student maybe eating their lunch, walking the trails. And therefore doesn't need a set lunch set, resets, but what has access to multiple spaces. To obtain that at the same time. Where our littles are separate.
They're right, they have separate, more managed
Yes,
chunks of their day.
correct. And our high schoolers are more independently selecting how to utilize that time.
So
So
are
from
you
the,
looking at- Oh, go ahead.
from the questions I previously asked, I'm looking at page 3, the first paragraph. Schools will limit food and beverage marketing on campus to the promotion of foods and beverages that meet the National School Lunch Act, et cetera. That paragraph from my prior inquiry seems to only apply during the school day, but it doesn't specify that.
Schools will limit food and beverage marketing on campus to the promotion of foods and, so. Marketing
So-
on campus during the school day.
Yeah, in my example of the PTA fundraiser that evening, you could just read that and you would think it would be included in that. Because it doesn't have a caveat or say during the school day, the schools will limit food marketing.
Yeah, no, I see your point. I think that is a perfectly reasonable edit to me.
Member Lessons?
Yes.
The first comment, Member Donnelly, was about the sold during the school day. The rule
Mhm.
applies to sold during the school day.
Oh, yeah.
And this one is
The idea of
marketed
marketing generally.
different than sold in the federal regulations. So I think that this one, and other members of committee can correct me if I'm wrong, was specific to the marketing.
The concept of marketing.
And so we will, need to look at that. If the marketing and sold under federal regulations of this, in times of days it can be done.
I guess I'm unclear about the definition of promotion, whether that could include selling cupcakes.
You totally can sell cupcakes after school, half hour after school.
But marketing is different.
Marketing would be like, the federal regulation gave an example of labeling the field, like Taco Bell.
Mhm.
Like a giant huge Taco Bell sign in the middle of my field. And that is a giant marketing of, non-compliant smart snack.
And not to get you in the weeds here, but theoretically, would it be considered marketing if I put a poster board in the gym saying, hey, we're selling cupcakes in the cafeteria? Is that marketing?
No, but a Tasty Freeze sign in the gym, we talked about this.
That would be more.
And that's why we allowed.
So if we have a list of school business partners and logos, and Tasty Freeze is one of them, which I think they are school business partners
They
with
are.
almost every
We
school.
brought them up because they're just like.
Right, yeah, they're ubiquitous.
Which is
Can,
why we put limit, not
Yeah.
prohibit.
Mhm.
We will limit,
Yeah, I think
which means we would not label our field Taco Bell as a giant, huge advertisement, but we could still have our business partners
Talk about
and
marketing.
our banners outside our fields
Yeah.
and things like that within our schools. We would just
Right. Mm-hmm.
limit that it's not blanketing our schools with promotions for energy drinks because
Right.
that's what they sponsor for this worksheet or this STEM activity.
or menus or specials.
Or menus or
Right.
things like that.
Right, so
Thank you.
maybe that's why we didn't have during the school day, because if you're gonna put, you're not gonna be putting the signs up and down
Right.
in the gym.
so I have to say, when I read that paragraph, I don't get all that. I mean, I understand it when you explain it, but
Mhm.
if I'm a principal or an activities principal reading that, I'm not getting what you're trying to do. And I conceivably would hesitate to put Tasty Freeze on the school business partner list, especially with the logo. And hopefully no one would ever name a field Taco Bell, but you never know.
We could close a $68 million deficit in a lot of ways.
Run for the end zone, then run for the border, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
President Bellamy, did you have a comment?
No, you guys covered it already. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think it gets across what you're trying to get across. I mean, it's a pretty fine distinction and I get it, but as policy.
Maybe you can clarify that. When we went through the WellSat scoring tool, they offered sample language of what would score a 0, a 1, and a 2. And I remember in this conversation that to score a 2 here would mean that you would essentially prohibit all marketing on campus. And we agreed in the committee that that felt
zero.
far.
Yeah.
That our intent was more to limit in the food service area, permanent marketing, things like the subway signage that we used to have up in our schools that we no longer do. The intent was not to limit the promotional banners where a local business donates $500 to the football boosters or prohibit the cupcake poster. We were really trying to differentiate between those things that is a district that we put up as permanent markers in the school that would be an endorsement of that versus those more temporary features.
Right, to earn a 2 with this question, we would have to prohibit all advertising of food and beverages that can't be sold during the school day on school property. So we leave ourselves a big fat 0.
Yeah.
And I realize.
Yeah, so again, I'm just gonna say, I read that paragraph and I'm out of this room trying to decide what to do at a school reading policy. I wouldn't understand all that nuance at all.
We can clarify in the ARs,
Yeah.
and work with our secondary, elementary, and our operating facility to make sure that our principals can understand what that looks like, limiting, according to this policy.
Well, do you want to rewrite this and come back or?
I don't really want to rewrite it, actually.
Okay.
I understand your question. I think that the definition of limiting is something that could be enhanced in an AR.
President Bellamy wants to say something.
Member Bellamy?
Yeah, I wanted to move that it moves out of committee to the consent agenda and that we can continue our process of reviewing and potential possible edit clarifications.
And Margot, it'll have to go to non-action first.
I'm sorry?
It has to go to non-action first because it needs 2 readings.
I'm sorry, non-actions. So we can have time to look at it again. All board members can look at it. I meant non-action.
I would, and I don't know whether you can, December's pretty full. I would suggest that maybe it just goes on to a non-action in January, and that might allow additional AR drafting time. That's just my suggestion.
The problem is if you draft ARs off of a paragraph that's ambiguous, to me, that doesn't fix it.
So
That the paragraph needs to say what you mean in a way that someone that's not in this room understands it generally when they read it.
So I'm going to read part of this assessment tool. And this one is a federal requirement that we restrict marketing on campus during the school day to only those foods and beverages that meet smart snacks standards. School marketing includes food and beverage advertising and other marketing like brands, logos, trademarks, etc. On any property or facility owned or leased by the district or school and used at any time for school-related activities. Federal rule language states that schools may only, quote, permit marketing on the school campus during the school day of those foods and beverages that meet the nutrition standards under 210.11 and promote student health and reduce childhood obesity. And we gave ourselves a 2 under this section that we restrict marketing of food and beverages on the campus during the school day to those items that meet smart snacks standards. And yet we don't specifically address school property. I mean, I'm happy to provide, and I think I sent Amanda the list of this tool that we used.
Okay,
It was kind of complicated.
I'm gonna note we're
We're
past
over time,
time already.
yeah.
I just
Um,
want to say I'm getting more confused the more it gets explained.
Mr. Chair, this is Carl, if I might get in
Yes.
line to talk.
Yes, Member Donnelly, were you finished?
Yes,
Okay, the Member Jacobs?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to suggest this committee, I mean, I think the vast majority of the board is in consensus as someone who helped get us to this point. I think that, I'm in agreement that this policy reflects a lot of positive work. But if we're not going to add it to non-action until late December or January, perhaps we can revisit the policy and governance one more time with the added context of the ARs, see the whole picture, and then just move it forward from there. I think the intent is for this new policy to take effect next school year. And if that's the case, I don't see that couple weeks, if it's even a delay in theory, because we're already talking about moving it to January by the time it gets finally approved. I just think the committee structure is a good place to review and have this informal discussion outside of the kind of firmer context of Robert's rules of our business meetings. Thank you.
And I'm gonna say I concur with Member Jacobs. My concern is that a year from now, all the policy needs to be able to stand on its own. People won't see the tool you're using. They won't have access to the discussion. And I do understand it's hard to write. It's not a simple job, but I would like for at least that much to be more clear. And I would like to read more as well. We do have a motion from President Bellamy. We don't actually have a second yet.
I would second.
Are you a member of the committee?
I am.
Oh, well, in that case, it's got a second. I would move that we table it until our December meeting with some specific rewrites on this and other suggestions, which I may or may not get a second for either.
I'll second it.
I got a second for that one.
I will not be here at the December meeting, but
Okay.
I'll be glad to see.
Your
somebody
spirit
else.
will.
My spirit will be
Yeah.
here. I will be on an
Okay.
Alaska Airlines plane.
All those in favor of tabling until December, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Aye.
You are. So we will look at it again, and I think if you do rewrite, like I said, I generally support everything in here.
Okay.
But in areas like that, we just need clarity, and there might be some others. I haven't read it in detail yet.
It is a party policy. There's a
It's a
lot
lot.
there, and
Yeah.
it does take time. So maybe my closing benediction would be, please read it and come prepared
Yeah.
to discuss it in
And it
greater
does
depth.
reach into the school day in
does.
some serious ways. And so I think time for administration, particularly in elementary, I would like to hear back if it's workable with everything in there. Any other comments on this, Member Higgins?
Not in regards to that issue.
Oh, well, then you're out of order.
I do have another, I just want to raise something real quick.
Under new business?
Yeah.
Okay, you would be second on the agenda there.
Okay.
Real quickly, I have a proposal for a change in board policy 6115 ceremonies and observances. It would add a sentence that whether Veterans Day is a holiday or regular school day will be recommended by the calendar committee, which is existing policy. But if it is scheduled as an in-service day, employees may choose to use a personal day without penalty if they so choose. And that actually is contrary to some contract language that we have. So I just wanted to introduce this so that people can read it and give feedback at the next meeting, not expecting reaction or discussion of it today. Member Higgins.
Yeah, one of the things that I talked about before, but I want to push forward now, is the idea of an audit committee. I'd like to bring in former school board members, former CFO, to talk about how that has worked, the impact it has had on the district, and the importance that has been placed on it. I know in the recent years, the board made decisions to discontinue the audit committee. I know that's something under the discretion of the president to establish committee, but I'd like to go ahead and bring that forward. And I don't know the process of bringing other people in to go ahead and present information, but we have former board members who are very strong on this issue. I can bring in a former CFO and talk about the impact. And just for overview, because I'm the only board member here that's been on the board when they had the audit committee. The audit committee doesn't conduct the audit. The audit committee works with things like, does do a prioritization of it. It's the administration working with the auditors. There's a role above that to make sure that all the issues are covered within that item in regards to the review of it. And there have been some tremendous benefits to that process. And so it plays a role with at the top that we're the ones that there's a reporting to if there's an issue or concern in regards to the audit that we would be included and not excluded. So to me, it's a very important issue. And it's one that I go ahead and present. Now, Paul and I had talked about it before, but it just never has gone forward in regards to setting up a time to bring that in. And I don't know the process as far as bringing other people in to talk about it, but we've got former board members and former CFO who's wanted to come in to explain the importance of this issue.
What we could do, and I would work with you and Member Jacobs, is draft the changes to board policy to create the committee.
Okay.
And once it's on the floor, then any of those people would be able to speak to it in the
Okay.
committee. And if we voted out, it would go to the full board.
And Margot would like to speak.
President Bellamy?
Yeah, you covered it. Just that in our board, by policy, we have 3 committees. It's not up to the president. By policy, we have 3 committees. If we want to change that, then that would come through governance, just as you just said, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments from anybody present for the good of the order?
A point of
Mr.
clarification.
Chair.
Member Wessons and then Member Donnelly, I think.
I just wanted to clarify that current board policy language in 5040 does say schools will limit food and beverage marketing on campus to the promotion of foods and beverages that meet National School Lunch Act nutritional guidelines. It's a requirement that we say those words.
Mhm.
So this is not a change that the committee implemented. It is just continuing.
So can we-
Clear policy from the past.
It's required. If we want to get money back from the federal government for lunches, we have to say those words.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it was Member Donnelly or Member Jacobs.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, it was myself. I just wanted to share, I was contacted by a member of the FCC or the Federation of Community Councils, and they indicated that at their most recent meeting, a couple councils mentioned that they weren't seeing regular representation by school board members at their meetings. And so I know that last year we passed a board policy which tasked the president actually with monitoring and collecting data from board members as to their attendance, and also limits board member participation the following year if they fail to meet a 50% threshold. And so I did want to pass on that feedback that happened at the FCC meeting, and hoping folks are getting to those meetings, especially right now.
Yes, copy that. And that I guess would be a message to the president. If you can report back on.
I will be reaching out to a couple of board members based on my report, or at least the information that I got from the Federation of the delegates at the Federation of Community Councils. There are a few board members that are not showing up. I'm going to reach out directly to them, and Amanda and I will come up with some kind of process to for board members to for me to check for board members to log in whether or not they can go or not go. Some of you are reaching out and asking for coverage, but please just we just got to figure out how to make sure every council gets a report. And when it's possible. Now, the ones that are on our meeting nights, we would have to give them a written report, right? But if it's not on our meeting night, please contact the president and let them know that you're not going to be there and give them the information that you want them to share. But we can't have board members. We got to hold ourselves accountable to what we said we were going to do. So I'll get back to everyone with more information on that. Thank you, member. Who was that? Jacobs.
Any other comments for the good of the order? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
They are. Oh, it's amazing.